Hi Year 11, we're looking at Act 4 of Measure for Measure and we're up to Scene 3. It's quite a long scene, so again I think this will probably spill out into two different videos, but I'll try and move through it quite quickly in the hopes of getting through it in one. So we're still in the prison, same as the last scene. We've got Pompey, who, don't forget, has just been hired to be the executioner's assistant in order to get out of his own charges of being a board. So he comes in and he comments that he is just as comfortable in the prison as he used to be at Mistress Overdone's brothel because he knows everyone here. And then there's accumulation where he goes through and he names all the people who are in the prison in order to show how familiar he is with them all. So you can see it's quite a long list through here. And then he finishes by saying that there are even 40 more here in prison. So you can see it's demonstrating how effective Angelo's approach to justice is, although perhaps it's also indicating that he is overwhelming the justice system and that when so many people are in prison, there's a problem with the law rather than a problem with enacting the law. So then, of course, the executioner comes in and asks Pompey to get Barnardine, and they yell for him. Barnardine wakes up and then they have a fairly humorous exchange about sleep being the same as death. And then Barnardine comes in. And what's quite interesting about this exchange between the executioner and Barnardine, Abhorsen is quite polite to Barnardine, calls him sir, and is very respectful in the way that he says, "Go and pray because I'm going to kill you today." And Barnardine responds by saying, "You rogue." So it's quite a disrespectful way of talking to the executioner and demonstrates that he really has no fear. And Barnardine says that since he has been drinking all night, he can't be killed today because he'll go to hell for committing sins the night before. And there's more sort of discussion about that. And the Duke comes in dressed as a friar and says that he's here to pray with Barnardine to prepare him for the next life. And the Barnardine responds by saying, "I will have more time. I will not consent to die this day." So he's got a very commanding tone, even when he's speaking to the friar, not just to the executioner. It's quite unsuited and unusual for a prisoner to speak like that. And the Duke says, "Well, you must." And Barnardine again says, "I swear I will not die today." So again, very commanding. And when the Duke tries to argue with him, Barnardine interrupts and says, "If you have anything to say to me, come to my ward, come to my cell, and I'll see you there." So basically Barnardine is going to wait in his cell for visitors in the same way that the Duke himself would usually wait in his great hall for supplicants to come and ask him for favours. So it links in with that very commanding language that Barnardine has been using. And it's a very interesting approach for a prisoner to be taking. It's quite out of line. So then the Duke comments that Barnardine is unfit to live or die because he's a horrible person and says, "No, go get him, he has to die." And the Provost comes in and says, "What do you think of Barnardine?" And the Duke says, "If we killed him now, it's damnable. It would be immoral to kill him now when he's in this frame of mind." And the Provost responds by saying, "Hey, that's all right because Ragozine the pirate died this morning. And hey, he looks just like Claudio. So what if we were to use Ragozine's head instead of Barnardine's?" And the Duke says, "Oh, that's awesome, let's do that." And then he says that he will continue to talk to Barnardine and he will make sure that Barnardine still ends up being executed in a timely manner. So Angelo says, "Oh good, let's do that." And then he said, "We had better hide Claudio so that I don't get in trouble for not killing him after I have already presented his head to Angelo." And the Duke solves that and says, "Well, put them in a secret prison. And before 2 days have passed, everything will be sorted out and you won't have to hide him anymore." And the Provost agrees to that. So then the Duke, dressed as a friar, still tells the Provost to quickly go and get the head to Angelo. Then the Duke is left alone on the stage, and so he gets a nice little monologue where he outlines his plans for what's going to happen next. So he just says, "Now I will write letters to Angelo. The Provost will carry them. The contents of the letter will witness to Angelo that I am near at home, and that by great injunctions, by lots of people asking me, I am bound to enter publicly. So I need to enter in procession so that people can see me and cheer when they see me. Angelo, I'll desire to meet me at the consecrated fount, so I want him to meet me at the fountain near the gates, a league below the city, and from thence, by cold gradation and well-balanced form, we shall proceed with Angelo." So what's interesting here is when he says, by cold gradation and well-balanced form. So he's just saying that using a very logical and unemotional and correct approach, they're going to sort out Angelo. So you can see that the Duke's opinion on the acting out of justice and the correct way to do that is quite clear there, which is ironic because he, of course, is being quite underhanded by pretending to be a friar and by setting Angelo up with this situation in the first place. The Provost comes in with the head and says that he'll carry it to Angelo, and the Duke says, "Good, come back, I want to tell you a secret." And the Provost says, "Cool." And then Isabella arrives. The Duke says, "Oh, look, Isabella's here. She wants to know if Claudio has been pardoned." And then he says, quite interestingly, "I will keep her ignorant of her good, to make her heavenly comforts of despair when it is least expected." So he chooses not to tell Isabella that Claudio is still alive for the direct purposes of making her despair at the news of his death, so that she will get the heavenly comfort of discovering that Claudio is actually alive. Again, I think it's quite ironic that he's using the word heavenly with its connotations of religion and therefore morality, because it doesn't seem like a particularly moral reason to not tell her that Claudio is alive and to upset her quite considerably. So the Duke says hello, and Isabella quite cheerfully says hello back, and she says, "My day is made better by being greeted by so holy a man." So that's also quite ironic, because not only is the Duke not really a friar, his behaviour in what he has just said to in what he has just decided to do to lie to her is far from holy. He's being quite calculating in his approach. And so Isabella asks if Angelo has pardoned her brother yet, and the Duke says his head is off. So the Duke very coldly and bluntly and directly tells her that her brother is dead, which seems a little bit cruel, really, and designed to upset her. And of course, Isabella does react in an upset way. She has an exclamation that she's going to pluck out Angelo's eyes, and then she says, "Unhappy Claudio, wretched Isabel, injurious world, most damned Angelo." So we can see that these exclamations show that she's getting quite angry, and we have already witnessed that she does succumb to anger at emotional moments once she allows her emotions to come through. So then the Duke reacts to her exclamations and her fairly strong language. So damned for the time was quite strong language. And this is really a pretty big contrast. If you think back to when she first found out that Claudio was arrested, and when she first went to see Angelo about it, she was very passionless and very much trying to use logic rather than emotion. So we can see that her character has certainly developed and changed throughout the play. So the Duke responds to her emotion and says this emotional outburst doesn't hurt him at all, and it doesn't profit you. So give it up. Give your cause to heaven. So this is quite an ironic phrase again, because the novice nun is now being advised to behave in a Christian way by the false friar. So their positions appear to have been reversed when it comes to morality. Then the Duke says, "Mark what I say, which you shall find by every syllable a faithful verity. So listen, I'm going to tell you something true. The Duke comes home tomorrow. Dry your eyes." So Isabella is standing there crying while he's telling her this information. And then he just says that Aeschylus and Angelo will meet the Duke at the gate. And then he says, "If you can, listen to what I want you to do, and if you do what I want you to do, you shall have your bosom on this wretch, grace of the Duke, revenges to your heart, and general honour. So your bosom on this wretch just means you'll be able to express your emotions to him. You'll have the thanks of the Duke for telling the truth. You'll be able to get your revenge on Angelo, and you will be able to restore everyone's honour. And Isabella says, sure, no problem. He gives her a letter and asks her to go and give it to someone called Friar Peter. And then Friar Peter will meet them all at Mariana's house tonight. The Duke will let Friar Peter know about what's been going on, and then Friar Peter will be the one to take Mariana and Isabella to see the Duke and accuse Angelo of everything that's happened. And then he says, I can't be there because I have taken a sacred vow that requires me to be absent. I have to be elsewhere. So he's using his holy orders as a part of his deception here. Then he says, go off with the letter, wipe your eyes. And then he says, trust not my holy order if I pervert your course. So if I'm steering you the wrong way, blame my holy order, blame my monkhood. So again, he's bringing in his holiness as part of his deception. He's explicitly asking her to trust him because he's a friar, which is ironic because he's not. Lucio comes in and says, where's the provost? And the Duke says he's not here. And Lucio says to Isabella, I can't eat. I'm so upset at the news that Claudio has died. And then he says, I'm really sorry that the Duke wasn't here. If the old fantastical Duke of Dark Corners had been here, Claudio would have lived. So he's being disrespectful and dismissive and overly familiar about the Duke again. So Vincentio interrupts and says, you are rude and inaccurate about the Duke. And Lucio says, well, you don't know the Duke the way that I do. And he uses some innuendo there again. And the Duke doesn't rise to the bait at this time. He says, well, someone will call you to account for this one day. You'll be punished for this one day. And then says goodbye. And Lucius says, no, I'm going to go along with you and I'm going to tell you more stories about the Duke. And Vincentio replies, I don't want to hear it. And Lucio gives him more intriguing information in order to keep the conversation going. I'm not sure if Lucio here is just trying to stir up the friar, if he enjoys getting a reaction, or if this is another outlet for his grief that he thinks that Claudio has just been killed. So Lucio tells him that he had impregnated a woman and was brought up in front of the Duke under a charge. And the Duke says, well, did you do it? And Lucio says, yeah, I did, but I lied about it. I forswore it, because if I hadn't, they would have made me marry her. So rotten medlar is a really insulting term for a prostitute. So you can see by the fact that he uses it that he thinks pretty lowly of her, despite the fact that he was the one who got her pregnant. The Duke basically says, you're offensive. You're not an honest person. Go away. And Lucio says, no, I'm going to keep walking with you. And then he says, but if I'm offending you, I'll stop talking. And he says, you can't get rid of me that easily. And that's the end of the scene.